guys, I'm here to read the next chapter, chapter 11, but before I do, I wanted to mention a few things about the last chapter. So, when we left off, we were at a cliffhanger, right? We want to know what's in the casket, who's in the casket. We know it's not Great Aunt Berta because we've already figured out that there is no Great Aunt Berta. But we don't know what's going on. We know that this wake is fake because it's just a trick to get the Jews away from the Nazis. So one of the questions that was asked on one of the last chapter questions was, who are all these other people? And some of you had some great guesses, but I think what would make the most sense, what I want you to notice, is that Peter keeps talking, and Henrik too, about all the cartons of cigarettes and all the, all the other Jewish people that they want to help. And so probably these other people who are at the wake are other Jewish people, like Ellen and her parents, who they're trying to help escape. And so Peter's there with Ellen's parents. He somehow got her out of Copenhagen, got them out of Copenhagen. And so they're back together, but they're still nervous and worried. So even though Ellen's very happy to see her parents, she's not happy because she's scared, and the soldiers just came and they yelled at them and they slapped Mama, and it was very upsetting. And then Peter reads from the Bible, right? And he reads this passage about how God counted all the stars, and he numbered the stars one by one. And so that's the title of our book, right? Number the Stars. So again, you guys had some good guesses about what that means or why that's our title, but I wanted to make sure that we all kind of understood together that Ellen points out that the reason, or excuse me, Anne-Marie points out that the reason that interesting passage in the Bible, or that it's confusing to her, is how could anyone possibly number the stars? How could you count the stars one by one? There's way too many of them. The whole outer space is just full of stars, but God can do it. God can count them. He can number them one by one. And so we are supposed to understand from the Bible that that's also a reference to his people. So God doesn't look down on earth and see just billions and millions of random people. He actually knows each person one by one. He can look down and number the people one by one, just like he can number the stars. And it was reminding me of that Bible story that we talked about once in class about the sheep. How if a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them wanders off, the shepherd doesn't just say, well, at least I have 99 and just leave the one. He will go get that one. Like, every single one is important to him. So, and he knows when one is missing because he knows all his sheep, even though there's 100 of them. And so they want us to understand that God is like that. So God cares about all his people, every single one of them. And so, just so in this book in particular, we want to point out that God cares about all the people. The Nazis wanted everyone to believe that God only really loved certain people and that other people were not important and it was okay to get rid of them. But in reality, God loves every single people, all the people. He loved the Nazis even. He didn't like what they were doing, but he loved them, and he wanted them to stop what they were doing and ask for forgiveness and be better people, and he would welcome them back. He loves all the Jewish people. He wants every single one of them to be helped and to be saved. So each one of them is important. So that's how the Number the Stars title comes into play. Okay, anyway, so let's read, because it was a cliffhanger. What's in that casket? So chapter 11 is called, Will We See You Again Soon, Peter? Anne-Marie blinked. Across the dark room, she saw Ellen too, peering into the narrow wooden box in surprise. There was no one in the casket at all. Instead, it seemed to be stuffed with folded blankets and articles of clothing. Peter began to lift the things out and distribute them to the silent people in the room. He handed heavy coats to the man and wife, and another to the old man with the beard. "It will be very cold," he murmured. "Put them on." He found a thick sweater for Mrs. Rosen and a woolen jacket for Ellen's father. After a moment of rummaging through the folded things, he found a small winter jacket and handed it to Ellen. Anne-Marie watched as Ellen took the jacket in her arms and looked at it. It was patched and worn. It was true that there had been few new clothes for anyone during recent years, but still, Ellen's mother had always managed to make clothes for her daughter, often using old things that she was able to take apart and refashion in a way that made them seem brand new. Never had Ellen worn anything so shabby and old. But she put it on, pulled it around her, and buttoned the mismatched buttons. Peter, his arms full of odd pieces of clothing, looked toward the silent couple with the infant. "I'm sorry," he said to them. "There's nothing for the baby." "I'll find something," Mama said quickly. "The baby must be warm." She left the room and was back in a moment with one of Kirsty's thick red sweaters. "Here," she said softly to the mother. "It will be much too big, but that will make it even warmer for him." The woman spoke for the first time. "For her," she whispered. "She's a girl. Her name is Rachel." Mama smiled and helped her direct the sleeping baby's arms into the sleeves of the sweater. Together they buttoned the heart-shaped buttons. Oh, how Kirsty loved that sweater with its heart buttons. But until the child was completely encased in the warm red wool, her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. Peter reached into his pocket and took something out. He went to the parents and leaned down toward the baby. He opened a lid of a small bottle that was in his hand. "How much does she weigh?" Peter asked. "She was 7 pounds when she was born," the woman replied. "She's gained a little, but not much. Maybe she weighs 8 pounds now? No more." "A few drops will be enough then. It has no taste. She won't even notice." The mother tightened her arms around the baby and looked up at Peter, pleading. "Please, no," she said. "She always sleeps all night. Please, she doesn't need it. I promise she won't cry." Peter's voice was firm. "We can't take the chance," he said. He inserted the dropper of the bottle into the baby's mouth and squeezed a few drops of liquid on her tongue. The baby yawned and swallowed. The mother closed her eyes. Her husband gripped her shoulder. So, just to make sure you caught that, Peter's giving the baby some sort of medicine that probably puts it to sleep. And the mom doesn't really want him to. She's just a little nervous. Giving like strong medicine to a little baby is sometimes not a great idea, but Peter says they can't risk the baby waking up and crying because they're going to be sneaking in the middle of the night. They're going to be sneaking through things and hiding and have to be really quiet to stay away from the guards. And if the baby woke up and started crying, they would get caught. So Peter says, he's sorry, but they can't take the chance that a baby might do that because baby doesn't understand to be quiet like older people would understand. Okay. Next, Peter removed the folded blankets from the coffin one by one and handed them around. "Carry these with you," he said. "You will need them later for warmth." Anne-Marie's mother moved around the room and gave each person a small package of food, the cheese and bread and apples that Anne-Marie had helped her prepare in the kitchen hours before. Finally, Peter took a paper-wrapped packet from inside his own jacket. He looked around the room and at the assembled people, now dressed in the bulky winter clothing, and motioned to Mr. Rosen to follow him out into the hall. Anne-Marie could overhear their conversation. "Mr. Rosen," Peter said, "I must get this to Henrik, but I might not see him. I am going to take the others only to the harbor, and they will go on to the boat alone. I want you to deliver this without fail. It is of great importance." There was a moment of silence in the hall, and Anne-Marie knew that Peter must be giving the packet to Mr. Rosen. Anne-Marie could see it protruding from Mr. Rosen's pocket when he returned to the room and sat down again. She could see, too, that Mr. Rosen had a puzzled look. He didn't know what the packet contained, but he hadn't asked. It was one more time, Anne-Marie realized, when they protected one another by not telling. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be frightened. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be in danger. So he hadn't asked, and Peter hadn't explained. Now, Peter said, looking at his watch, I will lead the first group. You, and you. He gestured to the old man and to the young couple with their baby. Inga, he said. Anne-Marie realized that it was the first time he had heard Peter Nielsen call his mother by her first name before. It had always been Mrs. Johansson, or in the old days, during the merriment and excitement of his engagement to Lise, it had occasionally been Mama. But now it was Inga. It was as if he had moved beyond his own youth and taken his place in the world of adults. Her mother nodded and waited for his instructions. You wait 20 minutes and then bring the Rosens. Don't come sooner. We must be separate on the path so that there is less chance of being seen. Mrs. Johansson nodded again. Come directly back to the house after you have seen the Rosens safely to Henrik. Stay in the shadows on the back path. You know that, of course. By the time you get the Rosens up to the boat, Peter went on, I will be gone. As soon as I deliver my group, I must move on. There is other work to be done tonight. He turned to Anne-Marie. So I will say goodbye to you now. Anne-Marie went to him, gave him a hug. But will I see you again soon? She asked. I hope so, Peter said, very soon. Don't grow too much more, or you will be taller than I am, little long legs. Anne-Marie smiled, but Peter's comment was no longer the light-hearted fun of the past. It was only a brief grasp at something that was gone. Peter kissed Mama wordlessly. Then he wished the Rosens Godspeed and led the others through the door. Mama, Anne-Marie, and the Rosens sat in silence. There was a slight commotion outside the door, and Mama went quickly to look out. In a moment she was back. It's all right, she said in response to their looks. The old man stumbled, but Peter helped him up. He didn't seem to be hurt. Maybe just his pride, she added, smiling a bit. It was an odd word, pride. Anne-Marie looked at the Rosens sitting there wearing misshapen, ill-fitting clothing, holding raggedy blankets folded in their arms. Their faces were drawn and tired. She remembered earlier, happier times, Mrs. Rosen with her hair neatly combed and covered, lighting the Sabbath candles and saying the ancient prayer, and Mr. Rosen sitting in the big chair in their living room, studying his thick books, correcting papers, adjusting his glasses, looking up now and then to complain good-naturedly about the lack of decent light. She remembered Ellen in the school play, moving confidently across the stage, her gestures and her voice clear. Of all those things, those sources of pride, the candlesticks, the books, the daydreams of theater, they had been left behind in Copenhagen. They had nothing with them now. There was only the clothing of unknown people for warmth, the food from Henrik's farm for survival, the dark path ahead through the woods to freedom. Anne-Marie realized, though she had not really been told, that Uncle Henrik was going to take them to his boat across the sea to Sweden. She knew how frightened Mrs. Rosen was of the sea, its width, its depth, its cold. She knew how frightened Ellen was of the soldiers with their guns and boots who were certainly looking for them, and she knew how frightened they all must be of the future. But their shoulders were straight as they had been in the past, in the classroom, on the stage, and at the Sabbath table. So there were other sources too of pride, and they had not left everything behind. And that is the end of chapter 11. Bye.